5 minutes after 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in this Wednesday morning. When I prepare to do this show, I use everything, and sometimes I try to just look at things that are out of left field to give myself some ideas. And one of the things I was looking at as we were ending the year was this video from this numerologist, and she was talking about how 2017, based on numbers, would have this, that, and the other thing. I was thinking, gosh, it sounds like she's talking about 1917, and I went to my trusty Wikipedia, and I thought, oh my gosh, yeah, I don't know if there's a reason for that or whatever, but if you think that things happen in 100-year cycles, I don't know, but it was just an idea, for a talking points, on the radio.
It's a good one. We
never used it, as you probably don't remember us talking to anybody like that, but it was interesting. So on the phone now, we have the great-great-grandson of President Teddy Roosevelt, and I believe he's been with us before. Kermit Roosevelt is his name. He's a constitutional scholar. He's an attorney, a professor of constitutional law at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. He's a former clerk for Supreme Court Justice David Souter and Washington, D.C. Circuit Judge Stephen F. Williams. He himself is an historian, which makes his book even that much more interesting. The book is called Allegiance. It's an historical legal thriller novel based on actual events from World War II, not to be confused with World War I from 1917. He's going to talk to us about a defining moment when American values and national security conflicted under Franklin Delano Roosevelt's policies, and I always forget the relationship between the two President Roosevelts. Kermit Roosevelt, good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Where are you? Where are you calling from?
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. Well, thank you for being on the air. I went to your great-great-grandfather's grave back in October, by the way.
Oh,
up
cool.
In, was it Saginaw Hill? Is that what they call it?
Sagamore Hill. Yeah, they've done a great job with that.
So as you did the research for the book, what came first, the idea for the story or the history that perhaps formed the story?
Well, what came first was the history, really. It actually came about in sort of a strange way. What happened was my editor said, I want you to write a novel set in the Supreme Court. And I thought it would be hard for me to write about the current Supreme Court without people thinking that I'm telling secrets I learned while clerking for Justice Souter. I didn't want Justice Souter to think I was intruding on his privacy or anything. Uh-huh. So I thought, okay, I'll set it in the past. And that gave me a lot of freedom because, I could look back over hundreds of years to find a good era in Supreme Court history and some exciting cases and an interesting time in our nation's history. And I was looking for a time that would have some relevance to the current moment. And actually, I started this book almost 10 years ago.
Really?
And I was thinking then just sort of generally about our response to the September 11th attacks, which are a striking parallel to Pearl Harbor, right?
Right.
Hit in this way on American soil. We didn't think it was possible. We feel vulnerable. We're scared. And, how do we react? How do we make ourselves safer? What do we do? Same questions come up. So I started looking at that era, and it turns out, that the parallels are incredible. Because I think really there's a similar sort of political and psychological dynamic that happens in response to these unexpected attacks. And the same questions come up. Whose rights count? Who gets sacrificed to make the rest of us feel safer? What are we going to do? Who is the enemy? How do you know who you can trust? Who's a real American?
Yeah.
It's sort of actually about American identity when you come down to it.
Yeah, the one element we have in today's world is we don't have a real absolute way of identifying the enemy. I mean, in World War II, we had uniforms and countries, and now it's guys in normal clothing with suicide bombs on their chest.
Yeah, it's even harder now. And in some ways, maybe that justifies us in doing more and being suspicious of more people because they're not just wearing uniforms. But in some ways, it also, I think, makes us need to be on our guard a little bit more because, World War II, the government could say, we need to save the country, this is an existential threat, we're going to take these extraordinary powers, we're going to do these extraordinary things, but of course it will end. You know, we're going to defeat Germany, we're going to defeat Japan, there's going to be a ceremony on a battleship where they sign a treaty of surrender, and then it's over, and everything goes back to normal.
Right.
And the problem we have now is, you know, there's no country to defeat. There are just these different groups, and they change from Al-Qaeda to ISIS and all these different acronyms. And the government just keeps saying, hey, it's sort of the same people. We're still fighting them. We still need these extraordinary powers, and we're just going to shift our focus. And it might never end. So if we sacrifice liberties, you know, temporarily, we think, we might never get them back.
Right. And one of the problems today is that we have analysts, and some of them are not really qualified to be analysts. They have microphones. They do radio shows like me, but they don't recognize the fact that they don't really have the qualifications. But nevertheless, people respect what they say and they influence people's thinking. Next thing you know, they're figuring out who the bad guys are, and anybody who happens to be Muslim should be thrown under the bus. And that's the mistake we've made in the last couple of years. And if you have the Supreme Court who are going to make rules based on public opinion, I don't know. It could be dangerous. It could be dangerous territory, couldn't it? You have to have strong justices, don't you?
Well, yeah, I think, you know, it's very important to have a Supreme Court that considers itself independent of public opinion on things like this, and also independent of the other branches of government. Because, you know, one of the things that we've seen, the people who drafted the Constitution thought they were going to protect liberty by dividing power among the three branches. You've got the president, you've got Congress, and you've got the courts. But they didn't foresee the party system. So if you've got one political party, as we do now, as we did in World War II, controlling both the presidency and Congress, then it's really important for the courts to be independent, because the president and Congress aren't checking and balancing each other the way they were supposed to.
Ah, okay, I like that. Yeah, I like that.
And that's where that's wrong, because I personally feel once somebody is elected, they should throw out the party affiliation and just do what's right for the people who they are serving, which is the American people.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. That's the ideal. It doesn't seem to happen so much. I think we've gotten worse even in that regard. I mean, we've got so much party identification and polarization. Politics is sort of a team sport now.
So the book is called Allegiance. So are we on the right track here with getting to the subject of the book? I mean, are we talking about having allegiance to one party or to one ideology?
Well, yeah. The question really is, you know, you're an American, you want to do the right thing, where does your allegiance lie? Is it to the Constitution? Is it to the law? Because you can have laws that are unconstitutional. You can have laws that conflict with the Constitution. Is it to justice? Or is it to people? You know, is it to people like yourself? Is it to people who look like you? People you grew up with? People in your neighborhood? Or people in the same political party? You know, in our modern world, we've got all of these conflicting notions of allegiance, and the question is how to work out those conflicts.
Okay.
And figure out what's most important.
So you took that historical era in our nation and in our world, and you wove a story so that you could maybe make the points about what the importance of the Supreme Court. Am I understanding right?
Yeah. Well, the importance of the Supreme Court, and just, you know, the importance of the individual citizen making choices. Because ultimately, I think a lot of it does come down to the people. You know, we do have a democracy. We got a representative system of government, and the government kind of acts the way we want it to. It sort of reflects our fears. It reflects our strengths and our weaknesses.
And what was wonderful about the writings from your book, I mean, I heard a lot about FDR, but I never really knew about Attorney General Francis Biddle, and that was pretty interesting, I thought.
Oh, yeah. Well, there are a lot of interesting historical characters. I learned an enormous amount about them. Francis Biddle was FDR's Attorney General. He was from Philadelphia. Our law school's library is actually named after him, so I was sort of especially interested in that. But Biddle's interesting because, in a way, he kind of confronts the key dilemma in the book, but then he fails. He doesn't do the right thing. He understood that it was important to have independent courts. He understood that it was important to try to weigh the interests of all people equally. And yet, in the episode that I'm sort of focusing on, which is the wartime detention of Japanese Americans on the grounds that maybe they were a security threat, Biddle actually didn't try to stop it. or he didn't try strongly enough. He wasn't really willing to stand up and make sacrifices for what he thought was right, even though he knew that that was what was right.
You think he was threatened internally?
Well, I think he was very conflicted. But basically, the way that he thought about it, I think, was this is what the Army says is necessary. This is what the public wants. It's going to make people feel better. It's going to show them that the government is doing something very visible. So, we get attacked by Japan, and it actually helps people psychologically, I think, to see ethnic Japanese being rounded up by soldiers, even though those people are in fact American citizens. But people feel better. They see the pictures. They're like, hey, we're doing something to the Japanese. So, race and nationality don't get separated the way they should in the public mind, and then the government acts that way too.
Yeah, and obviously a Japanese American who had nothing at all to do with Japan and maybe no allegiance to Japan suddenly finds himself being marked as a bad guy. And I'm guessing you already made the connection between 9/11 and Pearl Harbor. So do you see that connection happening now? Are we heading in that same direction where we're lying to ourselves about who is the enemy?
Well, yeah. I mean, we've gone further down that path, I think. There was sort of the tendency or the possibility when I started writing this, but now people are talking about Japanese American detention not as this historical mistake that we should be trying to learn from, but as a model for our policy. People are talking about a registry for all Muslims. We've already had something, sort of the modern counterpart, maybe, where you don't detain a population, but you place them all under surveillance on religious grounds. The NYPD actually sort of did that with Muslim American communities in the New York area. So yeah, I mean, we're really going in that direction. I think the question is just sort of how far will we go?
Kermit Roosevelt is our guest, and his book is called Allegiance. We do have some phone calls. Let me squeeze a couple in, and then we'll take the break, and then we'll come back. Good morning. You're on the air with Kermit Roosevelt. Thank you for waiting.
Yes, good morning, sir. One of the other shadowy figures in that Japanese detention situation was the then Attorney General of the state of California, Earl Warren. And I am given to understand that it was more the insistence of the California people that the Japanese be interred as opposed to the federal government. The Army people out in Hawaii were not in favor of that program, and in fact refused to ship over many of the Japanese from Hawaii. But anyway, I'll hang up and listen to your answer. Bye.
All right, Kermit, that sounds interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and it illustrates a couple of the points that I was suggesting. So, one thing is, frequently it's not the experts in the government who want to do this. You saw this with our enhanced interrogation program. A lot of interrogators were saying this is not the best way to get information, but it makes people feel that we're being tough, we're doing everything we can. So sometimes the government will push ahead with things because of popular support or because of the way it looks, even if it's not the best policy. And yeah, we didn't lock up the ethnic Japanese in Hawaii. Suggests it might not have been necessary in California. Why does it happen in California? Well, in part because the Army general in charge of the West Coast was racist and paranoid and misinformed. But also, yes, the people of California wanted it. Why did they want it? Well, in part they were scared. They were legitimately scared. Also, in part, they wanted the Japanese Americans' land. So there's this sort of economic profiteering motive behind it. And Earl Warren, really seeing a political opportunity, seeing that this would be a politically popular issue, supported the detention of the Japanese Americans, got behind that, and gained political power from it. And I think he felt bad about it later. I think, a lot of what he was doing as Chief Justice later of the Supreme Court was trying to make up for his unjust treatment of minorities before.
Wow. We are talking to Kermit Roosevelt, and I think so far we've been talking to Kermit Roosevelt, the historian. And when we take the break, after the break, I want to talk to Kermit Roosevelt, the award-winning author, because the book is, bottom line, it's a thriller novel, and there is a hero, and there is a story, and I want you to be interested in the book. So let's be fair to the book on the other side of the break, and of course we can continue talking history as well. We'll be right back with Kermit Roosevelt. Again, the book is called Allegiance. We will be right back.
The weather is brought to you by myfwc.com. Safe boating is no accident. Wednesday, not as warm with a mix of clouds and sun. There will be a shower or two. Our high 75 to 78. Wednesday night, partly cloudy and cooler, low 51 to 56. Thursday, partly sunny, nice with a high 72 to 76. Friday, turning mostly cloudy, high 72 to 76. From the Florida Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Steve Travis.
You've got a garden, and we've got a show for you called You've Got a Garden with your host, Master Gardener Carol Ann Baldwin. Carol Ann answers your questions about your flowers, your veggies, your grass, your trees, even questions about your bugs. And she's only on WOCA, so don't miss Carol Ann Baldwin and You've Got a Garden each Tuesday from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on WOCA The Source.
All right, 21 minutes after 10 o'clock. It's really a beautiful first Wednesday of 2017, and we have a new Congress that was sworn in yesterday. We have a new president that will be sworn in I don't know, 18 days or so. And if you voted for the people who are being sworn in, then you're probably happy with it. If you didn't, then you probably got your breath. You're holding your breath and hoping that things work out for the best. Kermit Roosevelt is an historian, it's not the first time you've heard it that we learn from history. And when it's told in such a way that we really grasp it, that's when we better understand maybe what we should do. And because if we ever don't remember history, we're going to make the same mistakes over and over again. And my little psychic thing with that numerology lady, that easily she could be right if she's just reading from 1917. Who knows? Who knows where she was getting her information from? So the book is called Allegiance. Kermit Roosevelt, thank you for waiting through the break. So tell me the storyline. You have a protagonist. What's his name?
His name is Cash Harrison. And he's a guy from Philadelphia. He comes from sort of a privileged background. He's sort of a quintessential real American. So no one's going to question his patriotism. No one's going to question his American identity. World War II starts, and he wants to do the right thing. I think a lot of Americans really feel that way. We want to do what's right. He wants to help. He wants to be useful. And he actually wants to join the military, but he fails the physical. So then he goes to try to serve his country in another way. He gets a chance to clerk at the Supreme Court for Justice Hugo Black. And he's clerking there for one of the Supreme Court decisions about the rights of the Japanese Americans. It's a case about a curfew that's imposed just on Japanese Americans. And then after that case, he stays in Washington. He gets a job working this time for Francis Biddle, who we mentioned before, FDR's Attorney General, also from Philadelphia. And he ends up being the government lawyer who's supposed to defend this program, the detention of the Japanese Americans, defend that to the Supreme Court. So he has to learn about what's going on. He has to actually go out and visit the camps. He gets involved in some other mysteries. Also, there's a murder. It's sort of more of a thriller plot there. But basically, he's learning about what the government is doing to keep him safe. And he's trying to figure out, is safety really the most important thing? Or, maybe is it more important to be good?
When you turned in the manuscript to the editor who said you should write about the Supreme Court, I hope he bought you a pizza. You've taken such an amazing assignment, if you want to put it that way, and told the story and told it in such a way, and using history as a real backdrop. I think you've accomplished the task that he originally wanted you to pursue.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, I hope so. I was amazed at how great the historical material was, because I was thinking, I'm going to have to set it in the past, but I'll really be thinking about the present, and I'll have to sort of force the parallels. But it turns out, it's exactly the same thing happens again and again.
Isn't that weird?
There was a line in your book that was pointed out to us. that states expanding your compass of sympathy. Well, that's what we're doing today. I mean, even though the 9/11 attacks are past, we, try to look forward and say, sure, we're going to take these refugees into our country, but, we want to have some guidelines followed. But people can only take so much because other people think they're entitled. And then they just trash the area they're in, and look at outside of Paris. They took in those refugees, and they were living on the streets in this one area, and they made it into a garbage dump.
Yeah, well, American history in some ways is the history of including more groups as part of we the people. Mm-hmm. That's sort of expanding the compass of sympathy. The set of people that you think are worth caring about. And over time, if you look at history in 50-year increments, I think we keep getting better at that. But, within any 50-year period, there are ebbs and flows, and particularly when we get scared, we backslide a bit, and we say, we look at people and we say, even if you're an American citizen, maybe you're not really one of us because you look like the enemy in some way.
And that happened to almost every set of immigrants. It happened to the Italian immigrants, the Irish immigrants, right? Mm-hmm. The African-American immigrants.
Yeah.
Of course, in their case, they were brought over as slaves. So theirs was a whole different story. But yeah, you're right. You're right. I mean, my gosh. Well, Kermit, you are a great person to talk to. I'm trying to remember the last book you came on to promote. What was the one before this one?
That probably was In the Shadow of the Law, which is the novel I wrote before this one.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, Kermit, thank you for being on the air with us. And was there anything in writing the book that you stayed away from, maybe to protect the Roosevelt name or anything like that? Anything of that nature?
No, I didn't do that. I mean, I thought it was sort of amazing and interesting how different members of my family surfaced in the historical materials I was looking at. Most prominently, FDR, of course, who was the president during that time. Right. But there was also stuff about Teddy Roosevelt. Felix Frankfurter, one of the Supreme Court justices, really loved Teddy Roosevelt. And then Teddy Roosevelt's son, my great-grandfather, actually makes a very brief appearance just because I found a bit about him in Felix Frankfurter's diary.
Isn't that interesting? Just on an unrelated but sort of connected note, we have a Teddy Roosevelt connection here in Ocala. Mm-hmm. Somebody told me he stopped here or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Everybody stops someplace. Yeah.
That's great.
Well, and next time I go to your great-great-grandfather's grave,
Yeah.
I'm going to show before 4 o'clock because they leave at 4 o'clock. Yeah. Whoever takes care of it leaves at 4 o'clock.
Well, you've really done something wonderful by creating this book, because it really gives everybody an insight into the true things that were going on back then, but also the names of the people that we really weren't given a chance to learn during our history class growing up in school.
Oh, thanks a lot. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an episode that doesn't get the attention it should in our history lesson.
Well, and there's a lot to our teachers' defense. You can only teach usually surface level stuff. It's up to us to be reading the things that bring us to a deeper level. Do you have a website you can direct us to? And I'm guessing Amazon is a good place, and Barnes & Noble?
Yeah, and also KermitRoosevelt.net.
Okay, that's easy enough.
That's
KermitRoosevelt.net. The book again is called Allegiance. Kermit, thank you for being on the air. Such an honor.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right, we will be right back. This is WOCA.
The weather is brought to you by myfwc.com. Safe boating is no accident. Wednesday, not as warm with a mix of clouds and sun. There will be a shower or two. Our high 75 to 70.